Morning, Jim.
Morning, Peter.
How are you today?
Grand Monday morning, but let's see how it goes.
Good. Well, the sun's shining and it's dry, so we'll take that for a Monday morning, even in your backdrop as well. So Jim, welcome to the Business Spotlight. Could you tell me a little about yourself and your role, please?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I've been actually with the University of Ulster nearly touching 40 years. Now it's been a journey from a researcher right through to professor over those years, just recently stepping down as head of school. But as part of that journey, I was a lot of the work was initiated by Professor John Anderson that I'll probably refer to a wee bit later. Now, John would have been the chief engineer with the portable defibrillator as it was being developed here by Professor Pantridge, and then took a lot of those ideas to the university where I met him in 1985. Really on the back of that, we were able to set up a bioengineering center called NIBEC. And then as we grew that and grew a course now with 80-90 students a year in biomedical engineering, we managed to bring a lot more research and innovation to the table through this research center. I think then a very important part of my career was being very much inspired with John and others on the idea that you could take a lot of basic research that we were doing, turn it into a more applied form and take it through the innovation cycle into a company. And at that stage, we did form and set up a range of companies, NIRAD, Hardscape, and then eventually HeartSign was set up. HeartSign then becomes Stryker of recent, Intellisense, then a wearables company, HeartSign being a defib company. Intellisense then gets taken on to be sold to Ultralink. So a range of different success stories throughout the years there, basically transferring that technology into companies, running the company up, taking it into relationships with Intel and GE Healthcare, and in the case of HeartSign Stryker, was a massive learning curve for myself and a very important part of the career. I suppose when I finished some of that, I felt I had to come back in and see what I could, how I could impact in the School of Engineering. So as I said, I just finished head of school. I suppose head of school gives you a bit of a chance to bring and merge some of that research, that innovation thinking, and that teaching and skills development piece together, and that's been an extremely important part. I suppose I had a range of other roles, be it sitting on the matrix board here in Northern Ireland, sitting on various UK and European bodies, and also helping local companies establish R&D through various research centres that I set up within the university here. Sheik being one of the notable ones, the Connect to Health Innovation Centre. There was another one there recently, the Eastern Quarter for Medical Engineering. So those are the type of things I do. I do mainly stick to the medtech, as known as health technology, and more recently the digital health technology space. And that leads up to a big development now that I'm heading up as I step down of head of school. I'm now heading up the £43 million Centre for Digital Healthcare Technology, which is part of the Belfast region city deal, and is one of 3 or 4 that's focusing very strongly on health, mine being sort of more the health tech area. Thank you.
And whenever you were growing up, Jim, back in the day, is this what you envisaged doing or wanted to do?
Yeah, to some extent. Now, my career's been crafted a fair bit over the years, but I always wanted to be an electronic engineer. I ended up studying physics. As part of that, I suppose I had an interesting era at the age of 13, 14, 15. The Spectrum come along, the ZX80 come along. Computing was really practically non-existent, but these systems you could start to buy them and play with them and build them up. So I started to do that and started to program some of these early computers and got them to control various interfaces in my house. And then when I went to university, I was able to apply it directly to a range of exciting projects that were exciting for me, certainly controlling motor systems and controlling various experiments and acquiring data, etc. So I think that piece of, the technology piece. I mean, I'm definitely inspired by some of the early visits to mainly universities and open days, etc., where I was able to spend a bit of time working on electron microscopes and transitional electron microscopes. And I thought this idea that you could see the atom, that you could manipulate materials to be highly functional in many different forms. So that whole solid state piece, I suppose, took me into the physics area, and then worked its way into electroluminescent displays, which I spent my early career working in for physiological monitoring. But, then moving to health tech was something that I really was keen to do. I very much, a sad part of my life was my father passed away when he just retired at 65. And part of that was within the hospitals, there was a sluggishness, I suppose, or a slowness to get diagnostics quick enough to identify what was really happening at the time. So once that happened, I suppose I agreed with myself, I have to do something about that. So when I met in 1985, when I met John Anderson, I was able to address that and start to work on diagnostics and very much getting diagnostics into the home, getting it developed, getting prognosis developed at an earlier stage, and really helping with that whole loop that seemed to be certainly very, very sluggish at the time of my father's death at that stage. So those are the type of personal things that have driven me very, very strongly. And that would have been at the age of 20, I suppose. I had that need and the need to, I suppose, devote my life in some ways to that. So to this day, that's very much to the back of my mind when I'm pushing the diagnostics area, the rapid healthcare area, and improved pathways in hospitals. That's what's really, really behind it.
And to tell me about some of the companies that you would be dealing with in the medical in your line of medical technology field, please, Jim.
Sure. For many years on and off, we've had some great relationships with companies in general. I think, believe it or not, Seagate here would have been a major company to come to Northern Ireland that inspired many of us to have the confidence to deal with some of that very high technology. So I got involved pretty heavily with that. But there was a lot of basically what we call thin film fabrication, solid state, lots of electronics that notably was starting to come into, and particularly sensors, was notably coming into the whole healthcare domain. So I, again, probably 20, 25 years ago, started to work with the Medtronics, the Boston Scientifics of the world. In fact, some early work with Stryker in those days, GE Healthcare, Intel. So really working on and off of those companies and getting challenged around some pretty challenging technologies. When we started to look at how we could then deploy to some of our local companies, that knowledge was there, and we got some of the companies here to develop roadmaps where we could help them, particularly with the whole digital piece coming in, the very much the need for advanced sensor systems and sensor technology, and then ways of integrating it within the healthcare system. So more recently, you find companies like BT now are attempting to focus very heavily on the whole health tech area. So we're very much involved with BT at the minute on those sorts of projects. We have Dell, Microsoft, PwC, are the sort of, again, the companies that you might or might not expect to be heavily engineering their pathways into health tech. Within the Connected Health Innovation Centre, I have about 35 companies at the minute, myself and other colleagues work with. Some of those are smaller companies here in Northern Ireland. The likes of, well, I mean, Randux is not small, but Randux is just one of the examples of the indigenous companies here that we closely have relationships with. As part of SHIC, we would also Sega Healthcare, you would Armstrong Medical, companies of that nature, IntelliSense and HeartSign now Stryker would be quite core to a lot of the thinking. Access 3D, And then there's a whole plethora of companies in this last 2 years that have kicked off, maybe 1 or 2 person companies, but starting to do very well. And we see some of the pharma companies now turning to digital as well for their help. I think an important part in the development of what I've been doing was a challenge that came up in 2016, 2017. It was called the X Prize Tricorder competition, which I had no interest in entering at all. A very inspiring colleague of mine, Mark Ennis, who's well known in Northern Ireland, challenged me to enter it as part of my role in IntelliSense. I said no to Mark 3 times, but the convincing person that he is, I somehow said no on an off. Yes, eventually on an off chance. So we entered it. It took a bit of money to start it all off. It was a £10 million prize fund. There was 420 companies and universities throughout the world that entered it. And when we get down to the last 100, I was getting worried because the amount of work and effort and putting a team together of 22 individuals was quite serious. The challenge was, and oddly enough, it was to be developed in a diagnostic system to be developed to a weight of £6, which incidentally was the weight of the defibrillator, the portable defibrillator that was developed in Northern Ireland. So there was some coincidence there, and it was all about getting it into the home, which was the same concept behind the defibrillator, getting it into the office, getting it into the home at £6 weight. So we were challenged to put a diagnostic system, diagnosing 14 illnesses, had to be diagnosed within 30 minutes. The marking system was half based on getting it right and half based on the UX, the user experience of actually using that system. To cut a long story short, it took 2 years to go through that competition with all its trials and validation, etc. We got down to the last 20 and the last 10 and the last 5 and ended up joint third, which was an exceptional achievement for us, considering, you know, it was an American competition. It was based out of San Diego, Scripps. So there was a lot of interest there for American companies, etc. And it did take, you know, quite a lot of money. We seemed to do it in a shoestring, but to end up joint third was extremely important. The point about it was it created a cloud platform, an app platform, and a whole range of diagnostic systems that we developed, which we then made open access. And there's a range of the companies, certainly within Chic and wider, have availed of that open access and certainly been inspired with the type of technology we put together, the way that we did it, the way that we accelerated. So there's 2 or 3 members of that team without and are now CEOs of these companies I've just mentioned. So these are the type of things that do take a bit of time to do. You do put yourself out there. You go international, and there's a lot of pain with it, but at the end of the day, these are game changers when it comes to moving, I suppose, technology, ambitions, and people forward.
And what would you say has been your biggest learning in your career, Jim? What would you say has been your biggest learning?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I suppose, one thing about, I suppose, the bridge that I keep, the education and the business piece, there's nothing but learning in there. You're always learning, but certainly working with people is always, it's always the most challenging. It can be the most rewarding, but there is always learning in there, how to get the best out of people, how to motivate people the best, etc. So very much depending on that environment, what constraints we have, etc. That's always the area, the leadership role, the inspirational role, and the way of getting people to work, I suppose, smart, efficiently, and get that work-life balance right these days, which is absolutely critical. You know, I suppose I've seen huge changes in the work environment. I've never seen as many changes as in the last 3 or 4 years. COVID has certainly brought a test for us all. Coming out of COVID, I think it's an even bigger test, and where we would have a lot of hybrid working now because of what we're on at the minute, the Zooms and Teams of the world. The challenge is still trying to get that right and get the the right energy back into the system is where we've, I think, still got a lot of work to do. So just learning to change, adapt, be flexible, and work with people is the big learning curve that I've certainly had over the years. And I don't think you ever can learn that one fully, and you just have to be able to adapt for the various situations that come along. But certainly COVID was one of the biggest challenges I think I ever had. I certainly found the business world, the boardroom world, very, very tough. We've some very tough meetings in universities and some tough challenges of maybe standing in front of 1,000 people to give a talk about your research, and you can get beaten up in that, but there's nothing worse than the boardroom, I can tell you. My experience of delivering against a timeline, delivering against some VC investments, etc., and making some big decisions, particularly when you're dealing with giants like GE Healthcare, and making sure you get maybe sometimes like the likes of IntelliSense at 50 or 60 people relying your career really relying on the decisions that made in that boardroom. Those are big decisions, and learning that whole atmosphere for boardroom and how a boardroom works is underestimated by so many people. So that would have been the other part of my life, I think, that I had a big learning curve on.
And who's the first person that comes to mind, Jim, when you think about the word success?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned John Anderson before, and John passed away a number of years ago. John was a very, very successful individual. I think in his own mind, he could do anything, but he was inspirational. And in my view, I think everything that John turned to, his work in academia, his work in developing these companies, although I worked along with John would have been very much a strong lead in a lot of the thinking process and the energy and the desire to make happen. So a lot of that's rubbed off me. I feel that being around John, not only allowed energy to come into the system, etc., but very good ideas developed, and you could see the pathway to seeing those ideas through, which is unique, that somebody can sort of bring everything together and then have that hunger to see it the whole way through. So certainly, John would have been an extremely influential person, not only to me, but to many others and many other teams. In fact, I have students that were taught by John. And after, those 30 or 40 years, they still would come back to me and talk about, just his lectures or his way of talking or his way of giving case studies or examples were very inspirational. I mean, there's some other people in Northern Ireland, the likes of Mark, and as I mentioned, of Brian Keating, are again, two very inspirational people that I've always looked up to. And at times they wouldn't realize this, but they would have given talks when I would have been maybe, 23, 24, 25, trying to figure out what I would do with physics, and they were able to show with what they had and their sort of backgrounds. Brian was a physicist himself. They could not only enjoy themselves, challenge themselves, make money at the same time, but be great role models, doing the right thing on every occasion that I could see, and building up, Northern Ireland to what it is today, a thriving, technological, powerhouse in many areas, with a lot left to be done. But those guys were so influential and maybe starting kicking off a lot of what we have now.
And what inspires you the most today, Jim?
What inspires me most? I suppose it's talent, and I'm talking here very specifically about Northern Ireland. It's the ability to get things done. What inspires me is how quick we can communicate here, how quick we can put up a challenge, and how we can see things through. We seem to, we seem to be able to step up, certainly in the eyes of Americans or Asians when they come over here and give us projects. I very much see that as something that we achieve on, we're very, very good at, and are as good as many nations throughout the world. we do have our weaknesses. Funding is not something that's abundant here. To try and move some of those areas on and to grow them and to build on successes like that we have. But I'm really always inspired by the sort of people and the workforce that we have. I mean, the inspiration, I mean, the university environment, we're just moved into this brand new campus. The block I'm in is called BC Block, for what it's worth. It houses engineering, computing, etc. Certainly a very inspirational building. So I think, I mean, in many ways, space and the whole ethos of a building, which is a lot about collaboration, and getting out of your offices and sort of mixing and socializing and socializing ideas and co-creation and stuff like that. That's inspirational. I mean, I think I walk around now here with my head spinning at the end of the day with just maybe too many ideas, trying to figure out how we can sort of achieve them. So I think people, space, and the resilience of Northern Ireland, what it's been through, and the high quality workforce that we do have at many times does inspire me.
And I'm sure it wasn't that long ago, Jim, but if it were possible, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've a couple of, well, they're not teenagers anymore. They've moved on. One of my son's doing a PhD, but my daughter's just actually coming home today from a trip around South America. She's just finished her degree. So I've had to give them some advice now on saying that I watch advice, because I think it's very important that anybody going on a career journey, figures it out themselves. Or parental advice, I suppose, can be different to giving advice to other people. The advice I would certainly give is, a good degree, a good education. STEM subjects are what I would normally be advising on. I mean, I think the creative side is wonderful, and I think there is now a future, particularly here in Northern Ireland, on the creative and the art side. It's coming through. A lot of time for that area. If it's STEM subjects, I think science is very positive way. I think to have that underpinning and that knowledge of how the world works is extremely important. However, the world is a digital world out there, and you need to be thinking about a digital part to that. Now, whether or not you do a science degree, you go off, you do a master's in computing science or a digital side to it, but I think coding, going along with the science background, is extremely important. I'm a wee bit sort of strongly of a view that a physics degree is a very good degree. That's all from the engineering department here, but physics is important. I think it gives, if you're doing even engineering, I think getting deeper into the understanding and the science. If you understand how something works, the innovation piece comes much more readily. The confidence is in your bones and how to see a product through. And you seem to have the ability to have wider understanding. So electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering, any of those design engineering, any of those subjects, chemistry, physics, whatever, tend to give you that nice underpinning. And then certainly a coding master's is a sort of advice. But I think choosing your career after that, there's a lot of translational skills in those courses I've just described. So the world is your oyster, and in the sense if it is a government job or an industry job or a job in research or whatever, that translational piece coming out, the soft skills these days are something that students should take very, very serious. I mean, the ability to be able to present, communicate, talk, write properly, prepare scoping reports and studies, understand some of the multidisciplinary pieces, be it in the business world, and bringing them together. Because when you go into a company these days, you stand out if you can grab multidisciplinary ideas and innovate and move forward. So those soft skills can be as important as the hard skills that you learn. So the advice I would give is certainly, picking some of those STEM subjects, trying to make sure you have a digital piece, pay attention to soft skills the whole way through, because when you come to your interviews with the big multinationals, it's your soft skills they're after. Very often it's, you know, and how you laterally think and how you think around co-ideation and all the rest of it. So practice team skills the whole way through a degree or your qualification that you're taking through, because you're going to need that in a competitive world of interviews these days.
And Jim, it's been really interesting hearing from you. If somebody wanted to reach out and get in touch with you to inquire further, what would be the best way to go about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, here at the university, I'm here based. You can email me if you type in Jim McLaughlin, Ulster University. You'll get me. I think there is only one of us, Jim McLaughlin. But jad.mclaughlin@ulster.ac.uk is my email address. Details online of and in LinkedIn of the type of areas that I cover. Always very, very keen to speak to industry with solutions-based sort of concepts, you know, around issues and problems that industry has. Is an initial way of getting to know you, and then building projects after that. So fusion programs, KTP programs are usually a way that we start. Consultants, etc., is the way we start getting to know, and then we turn to the likes of Invest Northern Ireland to build a stronger relationship, etc. So we have an office that looks after this, our research and innovation office would look after some of these first point of contacts, but certainly come to me in the initial phases and we can take it from there.
Brilliant. Well, like Jim McLaughlin from the Ulster University and the Centre of Digital Healthcare Technology, thanks very much for your time this morning. It's been really interesting hearing about your journey and the work that you do. So listen, thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating.